What I'm here to talk about, and with my colleagues, is Rabi Abdul from Vodafone and Jim Lejour from Intel. And we're going to be talking about the Common NFVi Telecom Task Force, which is an exciting new open source project that is a first in that it is a collaboration between the GSMA and the Linux Foundation networking groups. So that's very exciting, and we're going to be talking about what it means, and we're putting out an appeal to have you join the effort. It's an operator, vendor, ecosystem group project that is working within the ecosystem. So our mission statement, as it says here, is to focus in on the infrastructure component of the infrastructure that supports SDN. So let's see. Here's a little bit about how the work is breaking out, and I would like to invite my colleagues to speak about it. I think Rabi, the brains behind it.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, Common NFVi Telco Task Force, really the aim of it is to drive simplification. Drive simplification in different fronts. Number one is from the VNF side of things. We'd like to start having VNF designs against a well-specified, well-defined infrastructure. And that really means, as CNTT, we have the reference model, which is the first element you see in the screen, which is really determining how do we expect VNFs to write their applications against that common NFVi. And that really includes how do we expose these resources to the VNF, so VNFs could use standard interfaces, open APIs to consume those resources from the NFVi perspective. The second thing is driving simplification on the way the NFVi is being implemented. And this is really determining what kind of configuration do we expect an NFVi have that will be good enough for the breadth of services we would like to deploy on top of that NFVi. And that really, if you look at our reference model and reference architecture afterwards, we've gone through analyzing the workload requirements from the VNF perspective and figuring out how to really implement an NFVi that's good enough for the breadth of VNFs that we expect to be running against the NFVi. In essence, that really drives simplification on the way we operate our network, but also it allows us to scale out our infrastructure in the way we always dreamt of. And the third one is really around the certification and verification activity. How do we simplify all these verification activities that we have to do in order to onboard a given VNF into our network? And that really means we could start relying on industry-driven certification programs, such as the OVP, for instance, in order to offload many aspects of verification, which otherwise we'll have to do internally. And this way, we kind of operators reduce the cost, but also will mean we could deliver more services to our customer in a more agile and speedy way.
Excellent. So I'd like to talk about the ecosystem. This is just a sampling of the companies that have already started participating. And we have a number of companies have expressed interest. We've also have companies that have been deep in the weeds. We have about 250 pages of documentation so far. So we are well underway. And I would like to talk to, actually, before we go on, Jim, if you could talk a little bit about, how you got engaged as a vendor of operators.
Yeah, I'd love to. First, I'd like to see from the audience, how many people here were involved in OPNFV back in, say, 2013, 2014, some of the early days? Show of hands. A couple of folks. So those who were involved in it then remember how energized and dynamic it was. So the year prior, 2012, the CNTT white paper had come out. OPNFV got started, and it really coalesced a huge collection of people across the industry into a very energetic, dynamic effort to go and try to build out this capability that was called network functions virtualization. And it made a tremendous amount of progress, and then I'd say the last couple of years it started tailing off a little bit. And there's a lot of parallel stories. So OpenStack, I think, had a similar path where they built a lot of momentum and then it got complicated, then it sort of slowed down.
Well, wait, it hasn't slowed down. No, OpenStack is still very much alive.
No offense on OpenStack, but the Kubernetes folks, you know who you are out there, right? What I've seen in the past year or so is this combination that Beth mentioned between GSMA bringing together the network operators around the world and saying, hey, what's slowing you down to implement VNFs and NFV models, and the OPNFV community working on OPNFV Verified Platform, or OVP. These two groups have now come together to form CNTT. And that's a tremendous new dynamic that really has re-energized the entire ecosystem. And Beth mentioned the number of pages of collateral that are out there, and at the end of her presentation here, our presentation, there's a couple of links. And I want to strongly encourage you to go and look. You'll be amazed, very pleasantly amazed, I believe, by the amount of progress they've made. You've heard about the framework, and you saw the slide earlier that Robbie talked about. The progress that's been made has been tremendous to date, but we do need more help on it. Intel's involvement in this one is really to try to bring the same level of focus and momentum that we have in groups like OPNFV and continue that momentum and bringing it forward to help develop NFV's promise to the operators and keep that moving forward.
Yeah, excellent. So let me touch on what's actually going on and the framework and why it's important. So this is a slide that looks complicated, but don't worry, we're actually only part of the slide. So one of the big selling points to me, as a representative from an operator, is that the CNTT task force never saw itself as a silo. We have, right from the beginning, been working with other open source groups and standards bodies as well. So the ETSI NFV definitions are actually part of the documentation. We've been working closely with the ONAP community. In fact, we had a number of workshops last month in Antwerp associated with the ONS conference. And we had cross meetings with the major other projects, including OPNFV, OCP, CVC, and of course ONAP. And I know there were a couple others, Robbie?
Yeah, there was CNCF as well, the tug group
right,
within
of course.
CNCF.
Right, so CNCF. So one of the things, so this is the roadmap, and as you can see, we just released our first release. It's based on a theme of mountains associated with the countries where we've had the workshops. Although I think mountain is in Belgium is probably a misnomer.
Highest elevations.
Yeah, highest elevation. So what we initially went, the first release includes a reference model, which is kind of the overarching model, and we'll continue to have a single reference model with components, and then we have the first reference architecture, which is not completed yet. Robbie, I'll have you talk a little bit more about where we're at on that. And that was focused on OpenStack. We deliberately chose OpenStack because the majority of operators today are using OpenStack in some form or another, so it made sense, and it's a mature technology, to get back to Jim's point. It's past the hype cycle into the boring, actually used
real
cycle.
world.
So we've also started the second reference architecture. But really what's very important is we're also starting to work on the implementations and the certifications. So the real payoff is for both the vendors and operators to be able to certify those VNFs against this architecture within a framework to say that this VNF works in these architectures that we presented. That cuts the validation and testing times for everybody, not only the vendors but also the operators that have to go through the full certification cycle. So that's really the objective of this task force in the end. And Robbie, I'd like to turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about what we're currently working on.
Yeah, something I think you touched on, Beth, is, in my view, is extremely important, which CNTT trying to deliver, is creating that end-to-end framework that will see us as operators as well as vendor working together alongside the other open source communities to trying to align with the release cadence of other technologies, because the last thing we want is really to lag behind when new technologies appear in the industry, such as a new version of OpenStack or a new version of containers, and we will start building that kind of framework and the verification program within OVP. We need to make sure we align with the latest trends in the industry. And this is why you might think the roadmap is quite ambitious, which is ambitious at the moment, but we're really trying to focus on now is getting the entire framework up and running, so we know exactly how do we align with the existing releases, but also, more importantly, as operators, we collectively could actually go and start looking at what gaps exist in the industry, and how do we do around addressing them. So we have different work streams in CNTT, some of them trying to analyze the gaps exist in the industry, and collectively we would like to put resources into addressing those gaps in a way that will benefit everybody within CNTT community. So you always have a consistent approaches of addressing challenges when it comes to networking or security or isolations, and this is really the approach we're taking within the CNTT. As Beth mentioned, we have released the first initial draft of OpenStack-based reference architecture. We're really looking into stabilizing that coming to early next year, but we also just started to look at reference architecture for Kubernetes and container workload and seeing, okay, if we are here today and our destination is really becoming fully cloud-native, fully automated deployments for our workload, how do we get there consistently together and finding the efficient way of moving to where we are now into that fully cloud-native automated world? And this is really where collectively together we can set that roadmap to us, but also work closely with our VNF vendor in order to understand how do we go together into going that route instead of each operator finding their own way around getting into that final destination. So if I leave you with anything today is the framework that will see all us operators collaboratively working together to find a consensus and consistent way of delivering the infrastructure is really what the goal is here.
Right, and I'd like to add that we had a lot of conversations during the workshops with the CNCF folks, and I think it was an education on both sides about the difficulties of using containers in the telecom world. I think they had started working on it, and you know, most of them come from the development world, and there was, you know, at the beginning of the workshop, I felt we were kind of talking about cross purposes because most of them were developers of some sort and very, very focused on, you know, agile cadences and user stories and use cases, and we kept talking about requirements, and so that was kind of an interesting conversation where we had to kind of smooth out the differences between the two worlds, and you know, hopefully going forward, it will really give a boost to our end goal, which of course is to use cloud native in some form. I think there's a recognition within the telecom community that the likelihood that we'll go cloud native 100% anytime soon is pretty low. So I think we're going to be living in a hybrid world for a very long time. So
I thought it was interesting in James Buchanan, the last talk before the break, he was focused on edge, but if you saw his last bullet in there, it said that VMs and containers can coexist and are coexisting. And I think it's not this us versus them, it's really what's the right usage for the task at hand. You know, it's not I got a hammer, it's a world of nails. It's I have a set of tools and applying the right ones to the right use case, the right problem at the right time. Right. So to your point earlier, right, OpenStack is what is broadly deployed today. People are using it, people understand how it works, et cetera. Kubernetes is getting a lot of excitement, even in the comm space. Deployment stories there are probably a little different, and it'll be an evolution, not a revolution.
Right. So I think let's talk a little bit about the CNTT organization and release cycle. So Robbie, you should probably address that since
Yes.
you wrote this slide.
That's right.
Well, certainly within CNTT, we do have different work streams, and each work stream is trying to look at different artifacts of deliveries of CNTT. So we have the reference model work stream, which is looking at the relationship between CNTT and the Vienna vendor, and how Vienna vendor will be consuming our deliveries in a way that assists them to build their Vienna designs. When it comes to reference architecture, we do have reference architecture based on OpenStack and reference architecture based on hybrid container plus virtual machines reference architecture that we expect to evolve as we evolve with the technology to move to more cloud native moving forward. But what's important here, as you can see from the slide, are the release cycle and how do you really envision those reference architecture to map to the corresponding technologies from the open source communities. The OpenStack reference architecture will have to align with the OpenStack main releases, and that will be backed up by the verification program and the test cases that we would require to certify and test that particular reference architecture version with the corresponding architecture from OpenStack perspective. Similar in the containers world, we're trying to see what kind of components from Kubernetes world we need to start with in terms of figuring out the initial target of the reference architecture based on Kubernetes, which allow us also to run virtual machines alongside the Kubernetes, and what projects within CNCF we need to put more resources on, and how do we align the release cadence of that back to our CNTT artifacts. And finally, from the verification side, we do started a project in OpenFV, is looking at creating a reference implementation of the reference architectures we have, which will be the basis of any certification program we would like to drive using the OVP program with the LFN. And hence, any VNF verification activities will map against the reference implementation, so everyone knows at any point of time what API version, for example, I have to certify myself against. And hence, we stay current, we keep evolving, by still making the relationship with us and the VNF vendor is very clear and determined that way.
Good. So how can you get involved? So this is a very quick eye chart. Don't worry, it's published, so you'll be able to see it in more detail. It is, of course, open source, so everything is available for view. In fact, actually, if you Google CNTT, you will be able to get onto one of the links here that will get you to our GitHub. We have a wiki page under LFN, and we also have meetings that are starting. Our next workshop is scheduled. Oh, here's the GitHub stuff again. And our next face-to-face meeting is going to be in January, someplace in Eastern Europe. It was going to be in Budapest, but I think it's gotten moved. So, but stay tuned. And anybody who would like to get more information about how you can get involved, reach out to Robbie or me or Jim here at the show, or send. There's plenty of opportunities to reach out and learn more. And
one thing I might suggest, so if you're interested in what CNT is taking on, and if the problem statements have resonated with you, join the next face-to-face. What you'll find in those events is sitting across the table, sitting in the room with the people, having a drink at the end of the day. You will get so much more out of it than trying to join all the conference calls. And there are plenty of conference calls to join. So please feel free to join those. But I really want to encourage people, show up at the next face-to-face. Right. The community really coalesces there and makes a lot of progress.
So we had about 150 people show up at the last one.
Yep.
So definitely momentum is building. The previous one was in Paris during the heat wave, and we still had 75 people show up.
And survive.
And survive, yes. 108 degrees or 40 C is really hot.
And humid.
Yeah. So with that, I think I know that this is not really conducive to questions, so feel free to ask questions later. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope to see you participating in the CNTT effort going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.